There's the clip. That's your new sub emote, or sub notif, Leffen. Thank me later. Yeah, I don't think the advantage is not big enough to really matter for 99% of players. Yeah, the last thing I think, no, literally, like, that's what I'm worried about, is the people that, the same people who would say things like, oh, damn, you wave shot me out of shield, you must be a box player. These are the same type of people that will spend a bunch of money on a controller that they're not, you know, they're not gonna, it's not gonna matter for their gameplay because they already don't practice, right? And they're thinking they're gonna hit shit like this because they switch to a box. It's like, that's not really how it works. I worry for people who see this and they say, oh, box player hit insane SDI, ban it. When what you should also be saying is one of the best players in the world, Leffen, hitting insane SDI. So the new option on the table, and I have yet to watch this video. This is so Goomy. He was the originator, by the way, of the variable capacitor. He was the first guy to say, hey, you know, we're putting these capacitors into controller motherboards. And putting them onto the circuit to kind of artificially simulate PODE style delay, if that makes sense. TLDR, what is PODE? PODE it stands for potentiometer degradation. We used to just basically think it was a controller getting broken in. What it basically does is it tends to diminish very small recoils when you input your control stick back and forth. For example, you have a better dashback rate when you're not playing on UCF because the controller would not pull the slight input, and you wouldn't get a tilt turn input when you're trying to dash back, so you wouldn't get stuck in your turnaround animation. Also, it's good about snapback because the tiny little fluctuation of when you smash the, say you want to do a turnaround laser as you're jumping through the air, you smash the stick right. Well, it kind of the POD will eat up the left input that you'll get from the recoil of the stick, the snapback. And so you won't turn around by accident when you're shooting lasers, which I think if you're a Space Animal player, or especially a Sheik player, and you've ever tried to play on a brand new controller, especially a brand new Smash 4 controller, it's often very annoying when you're trying to just do short hop lasers and you keep turning around facing the wrong way. It's, you know, it gets you killed. Yeah, so PODE is basically, you know, as you play with the controller more and more, it will often kind of develop this phenomenon in the potentiometers on the control stick, and it will prevent these things from happening. And UCF was kind of a mod that was introduced a couple years ago that helps to make it so you don't need some of these things. It also makes shield dropping easier. Doesn't really fix the snapback issue that I just mentioned, and that's where the capacitor comes in. People will install capacitors in controllers to mitigate that snapback thing I just talked about, where you're jumping through the air and you're trying to shoot a laser and you turn the wrong way by accident. This is my GameCube's motherboard, and if you see this thing right here, you see this thing right there. This is a capacitor. If you look on this side of the variable capacitor, you can probably make out the end of the word. What is it? I'm trying to see that. It says vertical, and it's inlaid in the control right now, but on this one it says horizontal. So I've got what are basically, I've got a, you know, this is Goomy's first, you know, This is he was the first guy that really kind of brought this to Smash. But there are little switches, and you can see some of them are on and some of them are off, and they add variable capacitance to sort of simulate PODE, basically in the controller. The idea, I believe, is you will be able to set things like the POD yourself. But let's see exactly what the video promises.
I designed, programmed, and manufactured a new replacement GameCube controller motherboard that fixes several issues that controllers have to make them more functional, longer lasting, and more reliable for playing competitive Melee and Ultimate.
Good volume
I plan
level?
on putting these motherboards into OEM shells and selling them. This project is called the GOOMWAVE DX. How the GOOMWAVE DX works. Notch calibration.
Those are beautiful buttons.
When you hold into a notch, you want the control stick to read a specific value for doing actions like wave dashing and shield dropping. The values don't always line up because the profile of the stick box may be different, or because the shape of the notch doesn't perfectly match the stick box. Normally this is solved by carving the plastic of the shell until the notch lines up with the correct control stick value. With notch calibration,
Laudandus used to wake up every morning and notch his controller every morning and then do his practice routine.
Stick value.
And that was when he top 5'd Pound 2016.
With notch calibration on the GOOMWAVE DX, instead of carving plastic
every morning, and then he'd do his 3-hour practice routine.
You just press a button combination while holding into the notch, and the value is automatically transformed to the correct one. A feature that's normally only available as a complicated and precise hardware mod is available easily on the GOOMWAVE DX. With button remapping, you'll be able to swap the location of buttons.
Oh, that's sick. We've needed button. We should have had button remapping for the longest time.
Right after those
okay,
two
so
buttons
this is basically letting you remap your buttons, which is fucking really nice. This is also going to be really nice for Ultimate players who want to get into Melee, because Ultimate players who want to do things like, you know, using trigger buttons for jump so that they don't have to, like, I know people that don't want to claw, so they put, they make R, they always shield with L, and they make R a jump button. And then they can jump with R, and they can do easy things like, you know, short up airs or something like that.
The GOOMWAVE DX does not work the same as the Arduinos when it comes to notches.
Okay.
The Arduinos work by rounding all values near the perfect wave dash value to the perfect wave dash value exactly.
The Arduinos, if you will, they brute force it. Or what's the word? The way the Arduinos fix you know, shield dropping and things like that is they just kind of override the angle. Basically, they override the angle with it's like if you're at this angle, just pretend you're at this angle instead.
DX works by calibrating the value to the physical location while allowing access to every stick value. The GOOMWAVE DX scales the values to change the profile of the stick box, while Arduinos round nearby values. In other words,
the Arduino, say you're at a certain value, it'll say, oh, you're at this value instead. Whereas with this one, you map each notch or each point on the stick, and then it uses math to determine for everything in between, how does it scale? So yeah, with the Arduinos, it's hard-coded. With this, you map it yourself, and it's very custom.
Some OEM controllers can naturally consistently hit 1.0 values.
I also think all the box controllers have 1.0 dashes at this point, right? Unless the box nerfed that.
The GOOMWAVE DX works by rounding nearby values to 1.0 values. I don't advocate for rounding values for notches because box-style controllers don't make notches easier than an OEM controller. However,
box has 1.0. Well, there you go.
Should be legal.
And what that means, by the way, if you missed it earlier in the video, 1.0 is the furthest you can get. 1.0 is the furthest input in a direction, in the sideways direction, right? A lot of vanilla controllers out the box do not quite hit 1.0, and you actually run slightly faster if you open your controller up, basically, or if you just, you know, use a box or something like that, or if you calibrate it such that you can actually hit this number, you will run slightly faster. It doesn't matter that much. It really doesn't matter that much. It's very hard to notice. But I mean, yeah, it's a thing. You can move ever so slightly faster if you've got 1.0 dashes, as opposed to you'll see a value like, you know, high 0.9s basically.
Similarly, box-style controllers make up tilts unnaturally easy by making it a button instead of a halfway analog press to up tilt. For this reason, I have implemented slight rounding to up tilts to make them easier than an OEM controller, but not as easy as a box-style controller. Is this better than an OEM GameCube controller? In most ways, this controller is only as good as the best OEM controller you can get. The notches, dashback, snapback, dashback out of crouch, ledge dash, and pivots are only as good as the best OEM controller you can get. However,
I might have more controllers than this right now.
There are some things this controller can do that make it slightly closer to a box.
I've got at least this many controllers sitting around. I've got a box, and when I say a box, I mean literally a cardboard box that has about 20 controllers in there, and then I've got another 10 or so controllers just kind of sitting around the house. I might just have this many controllers. That being said, if you've ever seen, like, man, I went to Nez's place, and but damn, when I went to Nez's place, I was like, holy shit. I mean, he's just got like, it's like a sea of controllers just as far as the eye can see. It's crazy. So this controller has quite a bit of POD. So if I just kind of like put my thumb on the controller and I dash back. So every time it says UCF dashback, I'm hitting the dashback, but I'm only getting it because of UCF. And what's happening, I'm doing it pretty lightly. Like if I really put a lot of oomph into it, then I'll hit the vanilla dashback pretty much every time. But if I kind of like lazily dashback, sometimes I get the UCF dashback. And what's really going on there is, you know, every 1/60th of a second, the controller sends a signal to the game. And it reports where the control stick is at, and if this happens while you're kind of traveling to the edge of the control stick, you can get what is called a tilt turn, and you're going to be stuck turning around. It's going to take a lot longer, depending on your character. It could be anywhere from 5 frames to, I believe Bowser's is like 7 or some horrible number, but basically it's like 5 frames for a character like Fox. Okay, so basically when he's saying what he's saying about POD is that because POD tends to, the way it kind of manifests, if you actually looked at the kind of the oscilloscope graph, the way it manifests is the very small inputs kind of don't happen. They kind of round to 0, if you will. So instead of the game deciding, oh, you were your control stick was in the area where you do the slow shitty turnaround, you get stuck in your dash. It kind of rounds to zero, if you will, with a PODE controller, and you kind of don't end up getting an input there. Of course, with UCF, it doesn't even really matter, because with UCF you get dash back anyway. But if I were to turn universal controller fix off, then you would really see it. I'd be getting the shitty dash back sometimes. Ledge dashing is one thing that if you have, this is where actually we've mostly been talking about POD in the sense of whoopsies. In the wait, how do I get my oh, I didn't enable the ledge dash display. So yeah, so with ledge dashing, the way it basically works is you actually don't want to have too much PODE in the y-axis, in the vertical direction. We've been talking a lot about POD in the x direction, the horizontal. So if you have too much vertical POD, what ends up happening is when you try to drop from the ledge, sometimes it doesn't come out, and you could get a bunch of things. You could get the famous tournament winner, you could accidentally stand up. It kind of depends how you input your ledge dash. But there's a couple things that can happen. I use down on the right side. I usually use down on the left side too, but sometimes I use the... Sorry. I'm really bad at it because I haven't practiced this method in a while. That, which is using back. So with back, you're going to be using back, and therefore it's not really as dependent on vertical. I usually use the down method like that. So POD can make ledge dashes more difficult. And a lot of the time when you... Well, there's a lot of... I mean... ledge dashes are kind of a technique that are, there's a lot of nuance to this technique, honestly, because even the way you grab the ledge does kind of influence how you might want to go for the input. But the TLDR is having too much PODE can actually make it pretty annoying to get good ledge dashes, and you'll get this. Sorry, you'll get this instead of, well, that time I just killed myself. That time I just did a slow one. That's kind of a better ledge dash. So with you know, if you can kind of set the POD to the exact amount you want, if that makes sense, because it is, again, like anything else on the game controller, it is an analog thing, so it's kind of a spectrum. It's not you have it or you don't. You can have really bad POD because it's too intense. What else did he talk about? He also talked about, right, this is snapback, so you want to be able to, I want to be able to go, you know, laser right, laser right, laser right, laser left, right? I don't want to have to... If you have a really bad new controller, a lot of the time you'll be trying to laser, so I'm trying to do that, and instead I get that. Or even if you're Falco on the ledge, you're trying to do that. Instead you get that. And this can... I think if you're a Space Animal player or a Sheik player who's used a brand new controller, you've probably had to deal with this a lot, and it's very, very annoying. POD is usually good. Some POD is usually good. You usually want some, like it makes dashback easier. The turnaround laser thing, like where you get accidental turnaround lasers, that's what we colloquially refer to as snapback. POD removes this. So if you have POD on your controller, you won't get the accidental turnaround lasers, which is good. POD is often good. However, it can be too much, and then that's when you get into issues like... That's why it's POD emulation. I want to make it clear that what's happening here is what's so exciting about this is you can set, or not even you can set, I think it's kind of done for you by Goomy, but you get a good amount of it. You're not to the point where your ledge dashes are now very difficult and you're getting these tournament winner jumps. You can do your good ledge dashes. You're not getting the bad turnaround lasers, but you have enough to get good dashbacks. So my controller has a hard time with this. Let's see if I can even do it. See if I can even do one. There we go. These are empty pivots. So my controller is not very good at this. POD makes this harder. If you have a brand new controller, fresh out the box, this is very easy to do. Why would you want to do this? Well, think of Marth. You want to do like, they'll want to like forward throw and go like that, right? Well, this computer perfectly air dodge out of that combo. Probably doesn't work at that percent. But yeah, like this is, and Zane really likes having empty pivoting available in his controller. So for a guy like Zane who goes for this all the time, he actually will get to a point with his controllers where it's got too much POD and he has to either replace the potentiometers or clean them or do something. So there's kind of a fine line in terms of, you know, a Marth player like Zane who uses this as part of his kind of bread and butter punish game, how much POD he wants in his controller. And so this is going to be a godsend for him because for a guy, or honestly for a lot of Marth players these days, I think it's kind of become more bread and butter. This used to be just like the great Marths use this technique, but I think it's pretty common these days. The TLDR for anyone who's nervous about this sort of thing or doesn't or feels like they're getting in over their heads is, you know, the GOOMWAVE DX and you know, hopefully the Panic Global controller, or you could just use box style controllers and things like that. The idea is you don't have to worry about this stuff. You know, we shouldn't have to worry about it as players. We can leave this to the experts. But, you know, back in my day, you know, there were no dedicated controller people. There were no alternatives to the GameCube controller. And so, you know, we took an interest in this sort of thing kind of naturally because, you know, we wanted to make sure we had good controllers. And so, you know, we've kind of built up this, how do you say, just this kind of knowledge base over the years. These days, the knowledge level of the actual professional modders, people like Cardano and Nez, and of course Goomy and Gooms, is much higher than the rest of us. But you know, it's the kind of thing where ideally you shouldn't have to worry about unless you really want to. And if you do have any questions, if you do have any interesting questions, you know, drop a comment in the comment section below. If you're really curious about some of this stuff, maybe I'll ask, maybe you ask some questions in the comments below and I can get to it. People were saying, you're not gonna read this comment. On that last video, I went down, I read every single fucking comment. A lot of people asked about the shirt. I linked every single one of you motherfuckers the shirt. And I put in the description. I read my comments, I do. So if you have any questions about this stuff, if you're torn about kind of what kind of control, don't worry, it's not as complicated as it seems. It's only really as complicated as you want it to be for yourself. But yeah, I will try my best to answer people's questions or at least to point you in the direction of people who can help you out.